change the world. On we go.
Hello, friends of the internet. Welcome to Coffee Over Apples. My name is Steph, and this is a very exciting review for me to make for potentially my new favorite horror book of all time. This is Little Heaven by Nick Cutter, okay? I will preface by saying this is my third Nick Cutter book because I've also read The Deep and the Troop and gave both of these 5 stars. This one I just finished reading and also gave 5 stars. Now, a quick synopsis. This is going to be a spoiler-free and spoiler-filled review, so I will put a timestamp in the description so that you can skip to spoilers if you want, or if you want to just stay for the spoiler-free section. So a general synopsis is that we have 3 mercenaries that we're following. We're following them through 2 different timelines. So one is in the 1980s and one is in the 1960s. We are following them because they are hired by a woman named Ellen, whose nephew has been taken to be part of a religious cult into the middle of nowhere. She's worried. She's worried about his well-being, that this isn't normal. She was actually asked to do this by her sister, her sister is in jail, so her sister is not able to kind of like press charges or try to get custody of her son. So she's sending her sister to check up on the nephew, right? So she hires these guns for hire. And when they get there, literally all hell breaks loose. Hearing that premise, right, that it's taking place in the 60s, that it's a religious cult, I thought it was gonna be this kind of situation of the cult may have like called the devil or like raised hell through their ritualistic practices or some like Satanism. I don't know. Like I was ready for anything like that, right? But that is totally not the case. This pulls a lot of references from real life, and not in the monsters and the spiritual aspect. I mean, think 1960s, 1970s cult leaders convincing groups of families to follow them into a compound in the middle of nowhere and cut ties with society. If you're familiar with those cases, that's what this is based on. And our main villain, the cult leader, we spend a lot of time following them in their own dedicated chapters as an abused child growing up in I think it was a Catholic or a Christian orphanage. So that's kind of like the premise, that they go out there and they meet this cult and they meet this guy and things start to happen. But really, it's so much that those things were kind of always there. So this is about an evil that is so old, an evil that is just within the earth, old as time itself. And it kind of just waits. It waits for the right person or people to come along and unlock it. In the first 7 pages of this book, we are introduced to this evil. It starts off with a aphid, or what's that really like teeny tiny bug that ladybugs eat or something, and it's been infected by this evil, and it kind of goes and touches an ant. Now the ant is infected, and the ant moves on to bring back to the anthill. Now all the ants are infected, and then they touch like a squirrel or something, and the squirrel's infected, and it like slowly becomes this amalgamation of grotesque creatures that are infecting and connecting to each other. So think The Thing, right? You get that in the first 7 pages. That is not a spoiler. And since we start off in the 1980s, we know that the 3 mercenaries who were sent on this quest survive because they're still alive in the first chapter in the 1980s. And what causes them to go back to the scene of the crime is that this evil abducts the daughter of one of the main characters, and now they need to go rescue her, and in doing so, face this demon once again, right? Now, each of these guns for hire, what I loved about this is I'm a sucker for a spaghetti western, okay? I know that some of them are trash. I know that some of them have issues and things like that would probably not be published today or like brought on the movies today. Like westerns are not very popular anymore. But growing up, I loved sitting with my dad and watching spaghetti westerns. So this is giving cosmic horror western, okay? We get the backstory of the three main characters. One is Micah, who was a mercenary who was hired by this really messed up drug dealer, and the drug dealer also did some messed up things, but so did Micah. So Micah is no saint, and he kind of like, the drug dealer does something to mess with Micah and mess with his business. So Micah ends up in the situation where he's trying to get revenge on the drug dealer for like, listen, you messed up my business, and now you are my business, right? And then we follow Ebenezer, who is the only POC in this book and is a black man from England, who is also a gun for hire, and he just kind of like roams around doing his thing, right? I guess business went bad over in the UK, and now he's in America just making a living for himself as a gun for hire, the one thing that he's good at, right? And then there's Minerva. Her past ties into the other character somehow, and that's how she kind of ended up on this track of being a gun for hire, but she's not really good at it. She's really bad at it. She's a horrible assassin. So she's just like in this situation. So they eventually find this connection, either through choice or through work, that they end up kind of in a situation where they have to like assassinate each other, and it just ends up being a really whimsical moment. Like everyone is getting shot at in the scene, but then they all kind of get stuck together and need to go on this like quest together. So that's kind of like how they meet, right? And how they end up as a trio, and how they end up all getting on this train of, okay, now we're being hired as a group to go and do this rescue mission. So they go, and the things that go bump in the night are scary. It's so scary. I don't think I would have made it. This is one of those situations where if I was in this book, I would have died. I would have not made it out of this forest alive, or made it even to this compound. So let's talk about kind of each of the characters in their way, in their essence as people. Micah is not a good person. Ebenezer is not a good person. Minerva is not a good person. Another thing to note about this that we're told in the very, very beginning of the book is that each of these individuals was granted something by this evil when they met it the first time. So some of them, they can't die no matter what they do. They're granted this immortality that they didn't want, right? So each of them is given something different, something that in their hearts they desperately wanted, but that they would never verbalize. And when you're given something like that from this evil entity, it's not necessarily going to come in the same form or fashion that they wanted in their hearts. And that is the most heart-wrenching part of this entire book. When I found out what each of them was granted and how it was granted to them, I was in tears. It's been a while since a book made me cry, and this did it. I was probably not in a great public space when I was reading this. I think I was reading this. Where was I reading this? I was somewhere in public waiting for something, and I read this. And then I was like, oh, yeah, I probably shouldn't have read that right before a meeting, because now my eyes are all misty. So this book made me feel a lot of feelings, okay? If you enjoy classic horror, this does it. I think it does it wonderfully. I will say, one reservation that I had going into this was that Nick Cutter, aka Craig Davidson, because I'm pretty sure Nick Cutter is his alias for writing horror, in his other books, we didn't have any POC characters, and I was nervous when I first saw Ebenezer's POV, because I was like, is he going to be able to handle the nuance of writing this character, or is it going to be extremely cliche in some ways? And there were moments where it was cliche, but also I'm very happy with the way that Ebenezer was handled. Being a black man, in his case, in a Western town in the 1960s, in a religious survivalist cult, I was so scared for him. I was like, how is he going to make this out alive? What is going to happen? Is he not going to get any screen time? Can Nick Cutter handle writing from this POV? And can he do it in a way where it's going to do this character justice? I was satisfied. I was satisfied with what I got. Now, that being said, this is an extreme horror. So every horrible thing that you can think of happens in here, right? I don't even know what list of trigger warnings I can give you because it's all here. Everything is here. So, like, Big R is here. Everybody's racist. Every slur you can think of imaginable is here. Harm to children, harm to animals, harm to families, pain of mothers, right? Like, it's all here. I can't tell you I probably have an easier time telling you what's not here, but I honestly couldn't think of anything. Body horror, right? There's some splatter in here. It's a monster horror. Different kinds of abuse, every kind of abuse. I don't know, like literally. So just know that going into this. And that being said, Ebenezer, being a black man, faced a lot of racism in this book. And there were at certain points where he was kind of the comedic relief, but I think that depends on your understanding of this text, right? So I didn't see it as comedic relief. I saw it as this character is acknowledging the racism that he's being faced, and he is using his coping mechanisms in order to get through the situation, because what he does after is he goes off. He has such a great character arc. It's not necessarily that he grew so much as a person, but the things that he did in order to stick to his morals and to navigate certain situations, you know, I was like, oh my God, is he going to put his foot in his mouth? Is he going to do something? Because anyone at any point can just turn around and say he did it, blame one of these horrible actions on him, and no one would say anything else, right? Because it's the 1960s. Civil rights is barely a thing. So I was most scared for him. But again, knowing that he makes it through to the end and he's one of the three characters that in the future goes back in time to fight the evil, I know that he's gonna make it through. It's just how. What pain does he have to endure? And so I appreciated that his character got a chance to shine in this book. That's one of my favorite things about this. Also, what he did in the face of everything that happened to him. That being said, our other two main characters are not innocent. They are not anti-racist either. They just didn't flaunt it as much, or they weren't given the time of day to actually flaunt that because they were in a situation where they all needed each other and they weren't going to put their foots in their mouth, but they are also equally horrible people. So there's that. That being said, it's kind of like the playing field is level to me. That everyone is horrible, everyone has some sort of retribution coming their way, or they're in a situation where they have very different things at stake. And I think it was just so well done. So well done. I love this book. I don't know who I would recommend this to. This is not a book that I would regularly recommend to many of my friends. The monsters were ominous, and the scary children, beautifully done. I wanted to crawl out of my skin. If you liked the deep and you liked that whole, like, we're kind of, one thing that Nick Cutter does in a couple, actually in both of these, but like more so in here, is the stuck in a small space. So if you have claustrophobia, man, it's going to be triggered. It's going to be triggered so hard. So fair warning for that. I love a good evil. This was so good. Okay, moving into the spoiler section of this video. Okay, so referencing the real life situations, we have a Jim Jones, I think that was his name, Jim Jones, the one religious leader who brought all of his people out and did the whole Kool-Aid thing where everybody drank the Kool-Aid together. That scene in here was so grotesque, absolutely disgusting. We have these other characters that are in the scene with them, and it's kind of done in order to make the real goal of this evil become apparent, and that is that it wants food. And the food is the children. This evil is something that it's omnipresent. There's nowhere that it doesn't see you. It just needs you to be in proximity to it in order for it to take control of you. And so it's easiest to do that with the children. I loved Nate, who was the young boy, the nephew. Every time this kid's scene would come up and he would experience these horrible things of the evil trying to reach it, I got shivers. I was like, no, don't take him. Take everyone else. Take all the other kids who are like being mean and all these things, but don't take Nate. And the few times he came close to being nabbed by this evil being, I was sweating. I loved it. I loved it so much. I do think that, so what happens ultimately is that this evil being takes a singular person and uses it as its main host to keep it alive until it can get more food source. And there was a section where we got some kind of backstory of an all-boys school. I think it was an all-boys school that was out in this middle of nowhere 100 years before, and that these people were going missing and that they were kind of losing their minds. Now we know it's to this evil that was hunting them, right? And I understand that this was a necessary backstory so that we can get knowledge of what they find at the end in the cave, so that we can get knowledge of how this evil has maintained itself, at least not forever, but at least for the past century, and how it's still here. So I see the necessity of all of those things that were in here, but at a certain point, it felt kind of long. It felt like it was, like, I kind of wish that this was 50 pages shorter, but I understand. I don't necessarily think that there was much in here that Nick Cutter could have taken out, and it would have enhanced my experience of the story. Maybe the only thing I would have suggested him to take out was, we get these side villains, or like secondary villains, which are the minions of the cult leader. And one of them ends up succumbing to the creature earlier than the second one. I don't know that his whole thing was necessary. I think that the one guy, Virgil, who was the minion, who, again, a product of abuse, he needed to follow somebody, and he would have followed regardless, even if the cult leader, Amos, I think was his name, even if Amos had found Virgil in other circumstances, we didn't need the other guy there. That he would have just followed him, and I think the story would have been the same. General things that, even though I rated this 5 stars and it's probably a new favorite, that doesn't mean that I can't give constructive criticism. I do feel like Ellen and Micah's relationship was a little bit convenient for the plot. But again, I understand that they needed to have a child in order for the whole thing to come full circle, right? What happened to Ellen because of Micah's deepest wishes, that was the thing that broke my heart. That it just you wake up one day and it's just like the whole world freaking ended. And that had me emotionally wrecked. So, that stole my heart. Along with Ebenezer kind of going back to the town, realizing he's like, hey, I got out, but also no one here is going to freaking listen to me, because he's trying to tell the police that something is wrong. But their first thought is, who is this? 1, he's a foreigner. 2, he's a person of color. 3, we're in the middle of West Nowhere. How do I know that you didn't do it, right? They're immediately like pointing the finger at him out of convenience. And he's like, well, this isn't going to work. Guess I need to go handle this myself. And he like arms up the whole shebang. He comes in there Rambo style, and I loved it. I loved that for him so much. So that was my favorite scene. Another critique that I specifically had about this was there was one scene where I think Micah and two of the other few nice people that were, or people who showed any kind of humility inside the compound, were trying to make a run to go get the police and get help. This was before Ebenezer left, right? This was before Ebenezer went and did his whole like Rambo thing. Where they left to go get help, but they did it at night. And it's like, by that time, there had been enough things happening. There had been enough monster sightings. There had been enough chases. There had been enough evil children in the night. Like, why are you leaving at night to go do this? What made them think that the monsters weren't gonna come? So of course, people die. Of course, the monsters come. And I just kind of read that part, and that was like the only bit that took me out of the story. I was like, really, Nick? Did we need to do that? Your characters are smarter than that. I think that scene could have remained, and it just happened at the daytime. It would have been the same. Because up until that point, everything was happening at night, because that's when people were venturing out and when the monster was kind of luring them out, right? But that doesn't mean that things couldn't happen during the day, because as we saw later on, there were some things that were happening in the day when the monster gets desperate. It didn't want people to leave. So if they tried to make a run during the day, it would have come out and chased them regardless. I just thought that that was absolutely ridiculous. Like, why put yourself through all the extra stress of not being able to see where you're going? Kind of dumb. But other than that, like one 10-page spread, I was absolutely happy with everything else. I had a great time, and that's all I want, is to have a great time. So there's that. I don't know what else to say. I absolutely adore this book. I post videos whenever I feel like it. Hope you enjoyed this review, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
On we go.
What's it making, Mr. Wonka? Mr. Wonka worked the factory.
In your wildest dream